incorporated high, I recently incorporated high-resolution imagery to develop a deep learning model using a variety of constraints that land managers may encounter in the wild. This research is intended as a stepping stone to support and innovate ecosystem-based management, or EBM, in the Pacific Northwest, where winters have historically been downtime for drone operators. So my story begins in summer of 2022 when I took drone classes at Evergreen with Mike Ruth. During this time, I was afforded an opportunity to conduct research and volunteer at the Cooper Crest Ecosystem Restoration Site. This site is currently owned by the Olympia Coalition for Ecosystems Preservation, or OLE Ecosystems, a local nonprofit. While at the site, I discovered how useful drones are for ecosystem restoration. This included videography, photography, and mapping potentials. Some of the drone work that Mike, Robin, and myself conducted led to the discovery that the logging crew hired by the previous owner, Silvermantle LLC, illegally cut into an adjacent plot owned by the city of Olympia. The litigation from this discovery, which was corroborated by subsequent surveyor work, is still in progress, in fact. In addition to this discovery, there was an abundance of invasive species, including Himalayan blackberry, Japanese knotweed, and Scotch broom on and around the site. The combination of these variables inspired the bulk of my research. With all these in mind, I began to seek out a way to incorporate technology into ecosystem and resource management, and perhaps most importantly, into something that could potentially be cost-effective for long-term management. So in our ever-changing world, preserving the delicate balance of ecosystems is paramount. Scotch broom has emerged as a formidable threat. However, today, we gather here to unveil an approach that combines the power of deep learning and geographic information system, or GIS technology, in an attempt to manage and combat the spread of Scotch broom during the drone flying off-season. So Scotch broom is an evergreen, and while it does stand out in the summer with its bright yellow blooms, it also stands out the rest of the year among most of the dormant grass and deciduous trees. Scotch broom is very aggressive, nitrogen-fixing legume. It can grow between 6 and 10 feet tall, generate 30,000 seeds, and those seeds can survive for several decades in the absence of water. Given that broom plants are adapted to a dry Mediterranean climate, they absolutely thrive in our rainy climate, especially in full sun locations, such as deforested sites and fire breaks. This is catastrophic for local flora, as the Scotch broom outcompetes them by shading out seedlings, spreading in large and dense stands, and is even thought to change the microbiome of the soil to be less ideal for our native species. Additionally, new research is finding that a changing climate might mean that West Side Cascade fires will become more prevalent in the coming decades. This could be catastrophic for fire breaks and the region in general, because the broom plants act as a wick between managed forests and along roadsides. The middle image shows an example of broom plants spanning such a gap, while the image on the right shows just how combustible they are. So throughout this presentation, we will delve briefly into ecosystem-based management and how it serves as a holistic framework for addressing invasive species like Scotch broom. We will explore deep learning methodology within the Esri suite of products alongside some real-world constraints. And also, I will demonstrate the potential of AI to detect, monitor, and analyze broom populations. So by the end of this session, my goal is for all of you to have a brief understanding of the potential of ecosystem-based management, coupled with drone-supported deep learning and GIS to combat Scotch broom and other invasives. So EBM emphasizes the holistic management of ecosystems. By integrating deep learning with drone imagery, we may obtain valuable insights into ecosystem dynamics and make more informed management decisions using the systems thinking design. EBM is designed to revert to previous stages in order to meet the needs of a site or regional goal. So briefly, the phases of EBM start with stakeholder inputs and a selection of goals and compromises based on those inputs. Next, risk assessments, impact statements, and other knowledge are required to form the foundation of a future EBM plan. Following the creation of the plan, the measures are implemented, evaluated, and either reverted to a previous phase for adjustment or moved into the final phase for implementing, monitoring, and evaluating in the real world. Phase 4 is often expensive, and many of those costs are associated with the long durations of time over decades or potentially even centuries. So drone-supported GIS and deep learning positively benefit EBM. This is in part because they involve training artificial neural networks to analyze and interpret large amounts of data that would otherwise take months or even years for a human. In the case of drone imagery, deep learning algorithms can be trained to recognize and classify various features, such as vegetation types, land cover, and even specific species at incredibly high resolution. This research utilized object detection, which in theory would output a more precise location of smaller stands or even individual plants for smaller to medium-sized restoration sites. In theory, it could also be used for larger sites, However, computer processing power would require a minimum of $5,000 to $10,000 for the computer components. By leveraging the power of deep learning and drone imagery, EBM practitioners can gain a more comprehensive understanding of ecosystems, make data-driven decisions, and implement targeted management strategies that promote ecosystem health, resilience, and sustainability, all while saving money. This is especially true given that Phase 4, again, could last for up to a century. Before I dive into the methodology and results, I will address the numerous constraints that I implemented into this research. First being the weather and drones. I hope this doesn't come as a surprise, but we do live in a rainy region, and unfortunately, contemporary drones do not play well in the rain. Even high levels of humidity or light precipitation are enough to ground a drone pilot for nearly 3 seasons. Risking a drone could cost thousands of dollars with a crash, including any liability for damages to the environment or other people. Site accessibility on foot can also be dangerous, especially in landslide and avalanche-prone areas. Because of the prevalence of mountains in such areas in our region, I simulated a lack of site access while building the test database. In addition, the database location was close to my home, which further allowed me to conduct mapping missions within about 15 minutes. Another constraint that was not intended was the Esri recommended sampling size of 600 for machine learning. I found that this recommendation ended up being too low to be truly effective. However, it did provide a good baseline for model testing and the proof of concept, which I will show later. In addition to the weather, is our location around the 47th parallel. Remote sensing physics require moderate sunlight to capture imagery. For example, a cloudy day at noon in August would provide an ideal image because the sun is nearly overhead and the light rays become scattered with minimal shadows. That same image captured in February, however, would be less than ideal, with many distortions and artifacts being prevalent, as well as poorly generated tie points that were trying to use shadows to create references. And last but certainly not least is money and funding. This research sought to perform every aspect using minimal fiscal inputs. This was congruent with some of the other metrics, as simulating a lack of accessibility also meant that expensive precision GPS would not be available. That would save thousands of dollars, a fair but difficult trade-off. Additionally, following the Esri deep learning methodology would subsequently limit financial impacts, as the framework for conducting this type of work already exists. Anyone that's an environmental manager could probably tell you that money is often the sole reason ideas get shelved. This includes environmental remediation and the many alternative plans that are often investigated. And additionally, with a lack of funding will come an innate lack of computer processing power. So here's a visually overstimulating depiction of the methodology. I won't go over all of this right now. We're just kind of showing it. The first thing I will talk about here is the orthomosaic creation. So the creation of a usable orthomosaic was imperative and took around 6 weeks of tinkering with virtually every setting available to myself. Before I go on, an orthomosaic is a detailed, high-resolution, georeference composite image of the Earth's surface, created by stitching or combining multiple aerial or satellite images. The overlay map on the bottom here shows the total overlap from the individual images. Anything less than green, so 3, 2, and 1, tend to show more distortions and artifacts. The decision to eliminate ground control to save costs certainly had several trade-offs within this step. The first major issue was related to the generation of tie points used to orient the imagery. Given the long shadows and subsequent rapid movement of the sun across the sky, many distortions and artifacts were inevitable. It is difficult to see, but on the top right image, it shows around 300,000 to 400,000 tie points. They look like individual blue pluses. The small inset shows how some of those tie points did in fact try to use shadows to orient the image and remove distortions, which is inevitable and unfortunate during February when this was taken. Additionally, the elevation models derived for this project suffered from false elevation, which ground control would directly impact to a large degree. The elevation model comparison shows the model generated by Esri on the top, while the Web ODM free software generated the bottom model. The bottom was on average more correct with the geography of the land. However, it suffered from greater overall elevation errors as compared to the Esri model. Again, a major factor in this and in quality is the computer that you're using's CPU, GPU, and available RAM, which were about lacking with the 5-year-old computer that I have. So here is, after several months of waiting out the weather in Yelm, the final orthomosaic used to label, train, and test the deep learning model was complete. This orthomosaic maintained a ground sampling distance of approximately 5 centimeters. So a ground sampling distance is simply the resolution of the ortho image from the center of one pixel to the center of the adjacent pixel as measured. What is visually noticeable on the right image are all the green specks. Nearly all of them are Scotch-Brite. Now that the orthomosaic is created, here's the bread and butter, if you will, of the deep learning methodology. After downloading and installing the Esri Deep Learning Packages library, the modeled workflows can begin. So while the workflow steps are rather simple, the background processes and time requirements are not. Many AI researchers refer to this deep learning issue as the black box effect. Essentially, the black box effect refers to the lack of transparency or interpretability of the internal workings of a model. Deep learning models, particularly deep neural networks, are highly complex with numerous layers and millions of interconnected parameters within each layer. They can learn and make predictions based on vast amounts of data, but truly understanding how they arrive at those predictions can be challenging, if not absolutely impossible. So next, the labeling portion of the workflow involved classifying the schema or sampling class and labeling them in accordance with the goals of the research. For example, I used a single class, named it Thesis Scoparius, and began to freehand label the samples with the best visual quality, of which the first is in the background, outlined in red. I followed Esri's recommendations of approximately 600 samples, and hoping for a bit of luck, I added 7 more and saved the schema within the project's geodatabase. So here's another image after labeling nearly all 607 plants. Next, I exported the training data, which was relatively straightforward. However, there were a few important notes and guidelines that should be followed. Predetermine the output formats and metadata formats prior to completing the deep learning steps up to this point, as their selection will directly impact the types of models available to you in the next step. After many hours of testing on my computer, I determined that the Pascal Visual Objects class format should suit the needs of an object detection architecture. It is also important to save all of these files inside of the geodatabase. If you do not, the program will not recognize the files exist. Next, using the geoprocessing tool aptly named Train Deep Learning Model was effective, yet time-consuming and sometimes frustrating based on the sheer quantity of selections and available parameters. To simplify this process, I incorporated the default methods and settings as often as possible for object detection with a maximum of 20 epochs or training cycles. For this demonstration, the major selections were the single-shot detector with a ResNet 34 backbone architecture. Overall, it took around 10 hours to do the full training. So this slide shows the preliminary paper results of the training and adjustments with an average precision score of approximately 50%. So precision provides insight into how well a model identifies positive instances and avoids false positives. A higher precision score indicates that the model has a low rate of false positives, meaning it is more reliable when it predicts an instance is positive. So while 50% is considered low for deep learning, this is significantly higher than the other test models, which never achieved above 30% using the same constraints. Additionally, the code on the right is a sample of the model and kind of delves back into the black box effect where the code may seem inherently simple. However, the outcomes are really a mystery. So here are the spatial results of the drone-acquired images that were ortho-rectified and implemented into Esri's deep learning object detection. These are shown in this image with a small inset showing further detail. Now that's the black boxes with the red hash marks. This model increased the performance from the initial proof of concept up to 50% without the use of reference points, ground truthing points, or any on-site access of the sort. So here's some of my recommendations for future studies that seek to utilize drone-acquired imagery for EBM based on the results of this constrained model. Briefly answering the research question, yes, drones and deep learning can be integrated into EBM in a replicable way using contemporary and dynamic workflows. They can be utilized in a cost-effective manner. However, with more money spent, you will often get better results, just better equipment, better results. I would also argue that drones are efficient for time management. However, the current models perform poorly for around 3/4 of the year here due to precipitation and high humidity. So that's maybe something somebody could develop a waterproof drone. Additionally, developing and designing a comprehensive deep learning database, it is time consuming, especially when considering that the best results require ground truthing to test the database. However, once a database is fully established and operating at peak efficiency, it can be reused and shared repeatedly amongst anyone with an Esri spatial analyst and the shared deep learning model folder itself. So just like to say thank you to Kevin and Mike for being my readers. My peer review group was John, Brian, and Danielle, and my friends, family, and community members who helped me make this research possible.
All right, we're stopping the